Welcome to the Point. Legislators in Lansing continued work this past week on two major pieces of legislation impacting energy and access to abortion. We continue our conversation with quadrant leaders and governor. On this program, we'll talk with Senate Majority Leader Winnie Brinks about that legislation and why she thinks it's important. Senator, this has been an extraordinarily busy year. There's no way to really put it into perspective because as Democrats, you came in, you had an agenda, a decades-long agenda, and you have moved quickly with legislation to get a lot done. That has not always brought along Republican support. Sometimes it has. We're going to talk about a couple of things today that really are pretty much on your own kind of bills. And the first one is energy. And this will make this a long question, but it's worth noting that when these bills were passed, and it was later in the evening in a session day, and I was trying to keep track of them on Senate TV, but I didn't have to, because the moment they were passed, my email filled up with every Republican member talking about how terrible these bills were, and that the kind of the overarching theme was energy will cost more and be less reliable. Now, that's their perspective. Tell me your perspective about why you think these bills were important to pass and what the reasoning behind them is.
Sure. It's no surprise to you or to anyone in the legislature that climate change is on the minds of so many of our constituents. And so, you know, the short answer is really, this is policy that has been demanded by our constituents for years, and it has gone completely unaddressed in the legislature. I sat on the Senate Energy Committee for 4 years in the previous term. We took up almost no bills. We had a lot of presentations. No actual work was really done to address climate change or even acknowledge it. And so these bills really get us to a 100% clean energy standard by 2040. It's an ambitious goal. And then all of the complex details that you know, take so long for us to really absorb as policymakers, those things all build so that we can achieve that goal. So this gets us cleaner energy, it gets us more reliable energy, it addresses, to the extent that we can as one state, climate change, and it really, really is going to be a more affordable way to do things. So despite what they say in their talking points, you know, the fact that they don't know what's in the bills in many cases, I think is leading them to think that this may not be more affordable. Frankly, this allows us to draw down billions of dollars from the federal government to help us achieve these things, to diversify our sources of energy, and it in the end is all about getting to a cleaner, healthier, more affordable energy future right here in Michigan.
Now, when you talk about renewable energy, that is asking a lot of solar and also of wind. And I'm a little confused about natural gas, because when I talked to the governor, she said that...
So is Matt Hall, by the way.
Okay. Because when I talked to the governor, she, and I should say that Leader Hall of the Republicans over in the House said that you want to do away with all natural gas.
Not true.
But is there natural gas that will be allowed for energy generation, or is there not?
There is.
Okay.
And, you know, we're at a point where we're in a period of transition. So do we want to move away from those fossil fuels that are more polluting? Absolutely. And we do that with this plan, right? You don't get to 100% clean by 2040 without doing that. But there is a role for gas to play, and it will continue to be part of the energy portfolio in the coming years. But the point is now we are moving away from fossil fuels in general toward more reliable, sustainable, clean energy in the future.
So you talked about billions of dollars from the federal government that will help at least backfill some of the cost. But this has got to be an enormous undertaking to get there in 17 years. I mean, there would have been a time when I would have told you 17 years was a long time. It's about 2 blinks and you're there.
As we get a little older, it seems a little shorter, doesn't it?
That's right. Or as your kids start to age, right?
That's true.
That measures in a lot shorter period of time. And seriously, 17 years. I'm not an engineer, and I don't pretend to be. Just seems like that is pretty accelerated.
We worked very, very closely with so many stakeholders as we talked about this plan. And so a lot of these are goals. We know that technology has improved greatly since we last set goals 7-8 years ago in the legislature. We'll have an opportunity to reevaluate those again in a few years. So while we want to set ourselves up with an ambitious goal for generational change here, we are also ready to adapt to both the advances and anything that comes up that could stand in our way of being able to achieve that. We are confident, as are our stakeholders, and some folks that you might not think would get on board with this plan. We're part of evaluating those things and making sure that these things were achievable. So, you know, people who are part of our big utility energy providers were at the table talking about how realistic this is. Is it reasonable? Can we do this? They don't want to be in a position where they're required to deliver something they believe is impossible. And at the end of the day, we were able to come to good policy that we could get through that they would not oppose. And you can be sure they would if we couldn't do it.
If this all goes through, what does the landscape look like? How much solar? How much wind? Is it going to physically change the landscape of the state by, I mean, you either have to produce it here or you have to buy it somewhere else,
Sure.
I assume, right?
Yeah, and there's an opportunity to buy it here if it can't be produced, to buy it in our region if it can't be produced here for whatever reason. But it can be a combination of those things. So it could be solar. We've cleared the way for much more rooftop solar. So lots of our constituents have been asking for more freedom to be able to put solar on their homes. And so that is one way that you might see a change in your immediate neighborhood or in your environment around you. And you'll certainly see more sources of utility scale solar, and you'll see wind as well. But it's not going to look all that different than it does now. So I wouldn't believe the horror stories about everything, you know, all of a sudden changing. And there's a lot of misinformation around potential things that people don't like, but there's much better information about how this really moves us in the right direction in terms of health and well-being. And it is a sustainable way to do it, and it's a better choice than the fossil fuels that are causing so much damage.
So let me go back to this, because you just said two really important things there. One is that it is doable, but you also have some flexibility. And two is there is a lot of misinformation, or put another way, there's a lot of education that needs to be done. This happened pretty quickly. And all of a sudden, it was easy to message that, well, they're going to do this in 17 years and it's not doable, and it's going to be more expensive. What can you do, or is it your position to do it? I mean, at some point, people are going to be concerned about this, because if they don't have information, how do you assure people who are sitting out there now that are maybe not opposed to it, but they're also a little concerned about it?
Yeah, this will open up many opportunities for folks to get more information. So as the utilities move toward cleaner energy, they will be contacting their consumers and saying, there are opportunities here for you to participate in this, either in energy waste reduction opportunities like increasing efficiency on the envelope of your home, or replacing windows or getting a new furnace, new appliances. Those kinds of things are incentivized so that we can do better with the energy that we do use and be much more efficient in our homes. That should save people money, by the way. But that's just one example of the ways that the requirements that we set in place for where that energy comes from will become part of the communication from those energy providers. You may also be contacted by people who would like to make sure that you know there are opportunities to participate in perhaps building solar on your home. That kind of opportunity for those small businesses will grow as we have increased that opportunity for people to utilize solar on their personal properties. So there's a lot of ways that this is going to happen organically because of the things that we set up in this law, but also there will just be a lot of folks out there who will dig into this and figure out what this means for people, and hopefully people will get informed through advocacy groups as well as energy providers and others.
Where does this put us among other states? I think when you think about renewable energy and you think about big pushes for it, you think about California.
Yeah.
And for myriad reasons, their delivery system has had a lot of problems in California. I think Illinois, to some degree, has made some attempts. As I look at it, again, I don't pretend to be an expert on it, but it looks like this would put us among maybe the top 5 or 6 states in terms of a commitment to do this quickly. Is that a fair read?
I think it's a fair read. You know, it's difficult to compare because there are so many different factors in a place. You know, getting energy in a place like California or Texas is completely different than, say, Maine or Minnesota or our Midwestern states here around Michigan. But it's clear that we will be a leader nationwide and certainly in the Midwest. We've taken some of the best concepts from other states as well, and we feel that we've done things in a competitive way, but also in a way that is really appropriate for Michigan and set our standards and our goals based on that.
The legislature is likely to adjourn this coming week, and that means that any unfinished bills may have to wait until after the first of the year for further action. That could be complicated by the fact that 2 Democratic representatives are running for mayor in next Tuesday's election. If either win, it could greatly diminish Democrats from moving more of their agenda in the House. So next week could be a very busy one in Lansing. Back with more To the Point. Welcome back to The Point. We continue our conversation with Senator Brinks about the Reproductive Health Act, as it is known, and why Democrats believe it's necessary to implement the 2022 Prop 3, assuring access to abortion. I want to move on to another subject, and I will point out, I said at the beginning that these were a couple of bills that were Democratic priorities and they were passed with Democratic votes. If I'm not mistaken, the energy bill we just discussed passed with Democrat-only votes in the Senate. Is that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true.
Same is true with the Reproductive Health Act. And that was several bills, but they had to be spread up a little bit. And so those two got passed out of the upper chamber. And by the way, as we sit here, we don't know the disposition in the House. I'll be able to explain that in the wraparounds. But talk to me about those, how they fit in with the proposition that was passed last year, and what you perceive them as doing. And I'll have some questions because, again, there has been a lot of messaging on this. Not that there isn't on many bills, but these are things that tend to really polarize people sometimes. So tell me about, from your perspective, the reason for the Reproductive Health Act.
Yes, so as you know, last year the people of Michigan overwhelmingly supported Prop 3, and that was to ensure that people have access to reproductive health services, for everything through the whole scope of services from regular health care all the way to abortion care. And so these bills really help ensure that people actually truly do have that access. Early in the year, we repealed the criminalization of abortion care. These bills would go through our laws and make sure that there aren't things in the way, particularly things that are considered trap laws. I know it's a little bit of jargon, but it refers to basically things that are medically unnecessary, requirements that are intended only to delay access to care or to add in additional steps that might deter someone from getting the care that they are choosing. So these laws really address all of those kinds of things.
I talked with Representative Glanville about some of these a few weeks ago, and she pointed out, for example, the 24-hour waiting period, which I think it was passed a number of years ago. And I think, if I remember correctly, the thought was almost if it was a cooling off period to give an individual time to think about that. She talked about why that doesn't always work, because people have transportation issues, or maybe it's the health of the child, whatever the situation is. When you go through these one by one, and your members all signed on to them, what was the conversation with Republicans, or did you have that conversation? Were they willing to talk about these?
You know, this is one topic where they're unwilling to have a conversation that's productive at all. And, you know, particularly with this, like a 24-hour waiting period, it's essentially a form on a government website. You know, an appointment has been made, you know, a few to several days, sometimes weeks in advance. And this was just simply a step someone had to take to check a box. It wasn't what they say it was in terms of an, you know, cooling off period. So you haven't made a decision, you know, in a hurry, under pressure, that kind of thing. That's not what this form actually addressed, regardless of what they might say. And so it's just interesting to hear them stick only to their talking points that have been disproven so many times and that have been rejected by the women in the state of Michigan who have said, let me make my own decisions about my future, my health, my body. And so it was unfortunate that they wouldn't have those conversations, because if you look at the results of the vote last fall, it's around 60% of people in Michigan said they would like that to pass. And we know we're about a 50-50 state in terms of our partisan divide. That means many, many, many Republicans, both men and women, crossed that partisan threshold and said, we want you to affirm our rights to make our own decisions about reproductive health.
What does this then leave? Because we can't go through all of these. There were several things that were addressed. What, if any, limitations on abortion in the state of Michigan are there?
So there are all of the limitations that would normally be around health and safety of a woman who's making that choice in consultation with her physician. So as with any medical decision, there's pros and cons that need to be considered. And I think the bottom line is that people understand that that women are to be trusted and that the medical profession is to be trusted, that they are doing this appropriately, that they're doing it safely, and that they are acting in the best interest of that woman. So this is, it's a question that really underlies some of the opinions of folks who would rather control what other people do than have the best interest of that person in mind.
Well, the question wasn't intended in that form. The question was just a simple clarification, because, you know, in some places there are time limitations for when you can have an abortion, for example. Does that exist in Michigan?
There certainly would be considerations for the health and life of the mother, right? I don't know that we are talking specifically about time limitations, because every case is unique. So certainly we would trust a physician and a woman to make those decisions for themselves.
All right, I want to shift gears because I want to get this in, because I think this is kind of interesting. There are a couple of places, but one in particular over at the state capitol. You walk in and you look up around the top of the room, and there are all of these people who have served as Senate Majority Leader. And there are folks from Kent County there. There's Posthumus, there's Sycamore from Ottawa County. We had, we've had Senate Majority Leaders from West Michigan. However, in the past couple of weeks, something happened that has never happened before. And that's a new portrait was put up there, and it was the first time that it was a female, because you, as we pointed out early on, first ever Senate Majority Leader female, and certainly the first Democrat in a good long while. What was that like for you as you were celebrating young women at that same time, and having that portrait go up there?
Yeah, it was a pretty amazing experience just to see it on the wall. You know, one of the moments I had when I walked into that room initially was like, you know, because I obviously knew I was the first woman, but it just sort of sank in when you saw all of those male faces on the wall.
All of those guys looking down at you.
Yes, all of those guys looking at us. So, you know, Eva McCall Hamilton, the very first woman ever to be elected to the state legislature in Michigan. She's from Grand Rapids, elected 100 years before I was in the Senate, more or less. And her portrait is in the chamber. one of very few women in the entire Capitol building, right? Whether it's a conference room or the rotunda or either chamber. And so it's just been really inspiring to me to see her up there as an example. And I think of all the little kids who come through that building, and for them to be able to see that women and men are playing an important role in what happens in our state, in making really important decisions, is just a really moving thing for me. So it's great for me as an individual to be first, but really it's about so much more than that. It's about that inclusive symbol of government for our people, no matter who you are, where you're from, how unlikely you think it is that you could go into politics or be in a position of power. Just the fact that I'm here and that my picture is now on that wall is a testament to the fact that every voice is important, and I'm just incredibly proud of all the work that we were able to do.
When we come back, a look back at part of our 20 years, this time from 2005 to 2010. Next, To the Point. Last week, we took a look back to our first year of To the Point, which took us up to the 2004 elections that saw President Bush reelected amid concerns about the war and the economy. The race for governor in 2006 saw Governor Granholm defeat businessman and philanthropist Dick DeVos, while U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow defeated Oakland County Sheriff and former member of the State House and Senate Mike Bouchard for the Senate seat. The 2006 election also saw Democrats take control of the State House for the first time since the 90s, though with deep divisions between Republicans controlling the Senate and the governor, governance did not become any easier.
The only tools that a governor has in Michigan are cut tools to balance the budget. I can't raise revenue on my own. The only thing we can do is cut. So if the legislature does not act, we will balance the budget. We will do it one way or another, and it will be ugly.
By 2007, the state, with lawmakers and the governor unable to agree on a budget and with very little money to spend, shut down government operations. It sounds far more dramatic than it was, and in a matter of hours, things were more or less back to normal, but it made headlines for weeks before and after. In late 2007, Republican presidential candidates came calling to Michigan.
Good morning and welcome to the Point. Our program originates from Mackinac Island, where the Republicans are holding their biannual leadership conference. This year, they're hosting a number of presidential candidates, and there are some very well-known names. In the first part of our program, you will hear from Fred Thompson and Rudy Giuliani, John McCain and Mitt Romney.
When 2008 rolled around, the nation's economy and the war dominated a presidential race for an open seat. Hillary Clinton seemed to be the Democrat to beat, but the ultimate winner of the Democratic nomination wasn't even on the primary ballot in Michigan, which led to a rules meeting in Washington to determine how Michigan's delegates would be allocated. We talked to then Senator Obama about skipping Michigan's primary.
Was it a mistake not to participate in Michigan's primary, and will you tonight call for Michigan's delegation to be seated as voted?
Well, it definitely wasn't a mistake. I was just playing by the rules. People tell me we're not supposed to compete in Michigan. We didn't compete in Michigan.
In the end,
So help me God.
Barack Obama won the nomination and the general election over John McCain, 365 electoral votes to 173. In Michigan, he won 57 to 41%. An auto company meltdown and bailout dominated some of the early going in President Obama's first term. And in Michigan, another election loomed that would change the landscape of Michigan politics in a fundamental way. That takes us up to 2010. That's where we'll pick up next week, looking back at 20 years of To the Point.